Murder is not a word you'd expect to hear in connection with the Duke family. But a new book and a new eyewitness claim an heir to the family fortune murdered one of her employees. I'm Matthew Griffin, and you're listening to Duke Week. This week we'll hear from the co-editor of North Carolina Central University's student paper about life at NCCU this fall. Then we'll get an overview of Duke's art scene this semester, with some suggestions of shows and exhibits you can check out. But first, staff reporter Sana Pashankar breaks down new evidence supporting the claim that Doris Duke, billionaire heiress to the Duke tobacco fortune, murdered a man who worked as her art curator. This conversation contains a graphic description of a death, so listener discretion is advised. Welcome to the show, Sana.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So to start off, can you just tell me who Doris Duke was?
Yeah, for sure. So Doris Duke was the daughter of J.B. Duke, and she was a billionaire tobacco heiress. Her life was actually super interesting. She played jazz piano. She surfed competitively in Hawaii. She worked as a foreign news correspondent during World War II. And so she really lived a glamorous and extravagant life. And then she was also a huge socialite. She was friends with Elvis Presley. She knew Jackie Kennedy, but probably her most well-known legacy is of her philanthropy. So throughout her life, she donated a lot of money to AIDS research, medicine, education, child welfare. So that's probably what she's best known for today.
How did Doris Duke's art curator die, and what was the accepted narrative around his death for many years?
Yeah, so Doris Duke's art curator, his name was Eduardo Torella, and he was also her close friend and confidant. Doris Duke ran him over and he actually died. And so the accepted narrative, or the narrative that Doris told the Newport police, and that was accepted by the Newport police, was that they both got into a rented station wagon together. Eduardo was in the driver's seat, and he exited the car in order to unlock the gates at her mansion, Rough Point. And Doris slid into the driver's seat to drive the car through the gates. And according to Doris's account of the incident, she released the parking brake and the car accidentally leaped forward, which pinned Torella at the iron gates and actually crushed him to death.
What happened after the death? What did Doris Duke do?
Yeah, so after Torella's death, she made a number of philanthropic contributions to the city of Newport. She gave $25,000 to restore the cliff walk, which was a pedestrian walking path around her home. She donated $10,000 to the Newport Hospital, and she founded the Newport Restoration Foundation, which actually went on to restore old colonial homes in Newport. And partly due to her contributions, it really changed the city of Newport into a tourist destination.
Duke also had to pay Torella's family after she was found negligent in the death, right?
Yeah, so she gave each of Torella's siblings $5,620 for her role in his death.
And what makes people think her donations to the city are tied to Torella's death?
The vast amount of money that Duke gave to the city of Newport shortly after Torella's death is seen by those in Newport generally seen by those in Newport as blood money given to overshadow the record of her involvement with Torella's death, and kind of to potentially cover up the fact that there may have been more involvement than just an accident.
So let's talk about that. Who has begun to challenge the narrative that Duke put forward in recent years?
Yeah, so Peter Lance, who is the author of Homicide at Rough Point, which is a book about this accident, began to challenge the established narrative in his book. And so he really did extensive research and investigating and found evidence that instead suggested that Doris Duke actually murdered Eduardo Torella through a series of intentional acts. And he has both forensic evidence and has talked to a lot of experts about this. And all of this comes together in his book to kind of make this theory that Doris Duke actually slid into the driver's seat, disengaged the parking brake, and roared forward at Eduardo. And Eduardo most likely jumped on the hood in order to save himself. And then when the car crashed through the gates, Doris hit the brake, Eduardo rolled off the car, and then finally Doris accelerated a second time towards Eduardo again, dragging him and crushing him under the car.
And what might Duke's motive have been if this actually was a murder?
So right before his death, Eduardo Torella actually came to Rough Point to tell Doris Duke the news that he was leaving her as an art curator to pursue his career in Hollywood. He had just told Doris the news, and it was actually reported that servants heard a heated argument break out between Torella and Doris. And after Peter Lance wrote Homicide at Rough Point, a former Newport paperboy named Bob Walker came forward, and he said he actually heard these two crashes and heard the incident in general when he was delivering the paper at 13 to Rough Point. And additionally, he also mentioned that he heard a man and a woman arguing shortly before, which may have been this argument about Torella leaving her as an art curator.
Well, this is fascinating, and a piece of history I knew nothing about until I read your story, so thanks for breaking it down for me today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Want more detail about the evidence suggesting Torella's death was not an accident? Check out the full story at chron.it/Doris Duke. That's chron.it/Doris Duke. Now let's get back to the present day and set our sights just down the road. Deja Bunyan is co-editor-in-chief of the Campus Echo, NCCU student newspaper. She's here to talk about NCCU life this fall and the ways COVID-19 has shaped the Echo's reporting. It's always fun to have some journalist-to-journalist conversation. So, could you start off by just telling me some of the biggest news stories at NCCU this fall?
So right now we're currently working on 2 stories that's going to run, I think in the next 2 weeks, I believe, for homecoming specifically. The first one is a story about a 9/11, a victim of 9/11, but his son actually graduated from Central. So we'll be running that, and I'm really excited to actually read the story. The second story, I would say, would be another Central graduate, 2003. He's planning on going on Shark Tank for a multi-tech company that he kind of started from the ground up. Those are the biggest stories that we have so far. We've also ran a couple of stories as far as sports. We had a story that we ran earlier, I think a month ago, about it was Alcorn State versus NCCU. And the reason why this story was honestly so cool is because everybody was betting on Alcorn State winning. I wrote that one. I had a great time writing it. The game was great. So yeah, those are just some things that we have cooking up here on our side of town. Yes.
Cool stuff. And how are COVID conditions on campus? Because that's, one thing that a lot of colleges are dealing with.
I would say that we've been doing a really, really good job just kind of making sure that people are staying safe and social distancing and stuff like that. Our student health department has been really good with encouraging students to get vaccinated if they choose to do so, but then also encouraging students to get tested every 2 weeks as well. So we're all taking it in stride. It's not the best situation, with me being a senior, but we're in way better conditions, I believe, in comparison to last year.
And how do you think the Echo has adapted and learned over the past year? After covering such a strange year with all of the big stories last year, are there different ways that you approach your coverage and how you cover events?
Yes, so that is a really good question. Last year, when I was a staff writer, we were still doing print editions. We decided to move away from that after COVID because, with the touching of the newspapers and the spreading of the germs, and then with everybody, scrambling in the newsroom trying to, get ready for print day, it just wasn't safe. So, and then on top of that, we were looking more strategically about who can we reach as far as our student body. And let's just be honest, not a lot of students, unless you love to read the newspaper, not a lot of students are just gonna, pick up a newspaper and be like, okay, what's going on in the paper? We have a whole website where we post our stories, and that's where most of our stories are going. I'm also in charge of our social media too. So any events that we have on campus, it could just be social gatherings. We'll post a quick picture, and then we'll do maybe a Twitter statement, maybe 100 words if Instagram allows. We wanted to put out stories that were relevant. We wanted to put out stories that were, time efficient, and social media does a great job at doing that. And the fact that our website is able to reach not just Central, but the masses, it goes farther than just, regular print. So will we come back to visit print editions? We probably will, as COVID, is on the decline. But I think as of for right now, I think strategically, this is probably the best move for us.
Thanks so much. I really enjoyed our conversation, and have a nice day.
Yes, you too.
With COVID restrictions loosening, in-person art is returning all around campus. Chronicle Recess editor Tessa Delgo is going to talk about her favorites and make some recommendations. So last year, the arts were largely virtual at Duke. Things are opening up and getting a lot closer to normal this fall. How have the arts changed?
Yeah, so I feel like this year's kind of like more making up for what we lost last year. So we're not seeing anything that's super radically different from what we were seeing in like 2019 fall. Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people were just like really missing out on things that were supposed to happen either at all or at least in person last semester or last fall. So we're seeing a lot of things like start to kind of come back. So like Duke Coffee House has a pretty full slate of shows this semester, as does Duke Performances. I mean, they did a lot of online stuff last year, but they have in-person performances again. Student groups, the symphony orchestra is doing concerts again. There's a lot of like film screenings in person, whether that's like through Free Water or through Screen Society at the Ruby. Even literally just like Duke Create workshops, getting people kind of like involved in the arts. I think that was really hard last year because, you know, you had to like pick up your supplies and like go do it in your dorm room. And I think that kind of was difficult for a lot of people to be engaged in. But yeah, I actually had a writer go to a Duke Create workshop a few weeks ago. She wrote a story on like the meditative art workshop that they're doing. And she was like, yeah, she didn't know what to expect out of it. She's the first year. But she went and she like loved it. Now she's a regular. So I think that that's, you know, we're seeing that kind of like where you can just sort of like happen upon things.
Cool, that's great to hear. So any personal favorites so far? Things you found fun?
So I have a personal bias, but my first ever Chronicle / Recess article was like over 2 years ago now. It was about this dance company, Gaspard and Dancers. And I interviewed the director and they did this like gorgeous performance that I got to go to. It was in the Bryant Center. They're coming back to campus. That's going to be Saturday, November 13th. Yeah, I've had writers go to like Screen Society performances at the Ruby that they've really enjoyed. Again, the Duke Create workshops, the meditative art one especially. But honestly, I just think people should like go try things now that we have the opportunity to do so. I think if you look for these events, like there's always some performance or screening or something happening on campus. If nothing else, I think we were all reminded during the pandemic, you know, of of like how much those little, you know, happenstance kind of random events and stuff that we went to, especially on a college campus, how much it actually removes from your experience when you take that away. And so I just hope that people, you know, are incentivized to go out and do things again.
So if you had to give a couple recommendations to students who haven't been to an in-person performance or exhibition in the past year and want to get back out and go to one, what would they be?
Yeah, so I would definitely check out the coffee house performances, especially if they're a first year or, you know, on East Campus or near East Campus. It's this like really cool space. It's tucked away in like the back of East Campus, so it's hard to find sometimes. But they have like shows, I think like basically every other weekend at this point, sometimes every weekend, kind of depends. And it's always like cool, like underground, a lot of local artists. The Nasher has this really cool exhibit going on. It's about like the provenance of a painting. It's called Off the Map. And it basically just tracks the history of this one painting and how it's like moved through different transactions and different like where whose possession it was in during different points of history. Even just going to the Nasher in general, honestly, I think brunch is open at least like Tuesday through Friday, so extra incentive. Then we just missed actually the North Carolina Latin American Film Festival, and they do have one last event on the 31st. I think there's going to be more film festivals in the near future, so definitely just kind of looking out for those.
In other news, North Carolina Democratic Representative David Price, a tenured professor in the Sanford School of Public Policy, will not seek re-election after 17 terms in the U.S. House. And the Cameron Crazies were back in Cameron this past Friday for the first time since March 7th, 2020, for the Countdown to Craziness men's basketball scrimmage. I'd also like to note that the Chronicle has updated our guide to campus resources, groups, and people that it might be helpful to know. That includes 2 new guides to mental health resources. The link to the resource guide is chron.it/resources. That's chron.it/resources. That's all until next week. If you like what we're doing, subscribe, tell your friends, and help us get out the word that the Chronicle has a weekly news podcast. Our music is Goji Berry Beat by Nana Kwalbina. Now it's time to turn off this podcast and go check out some art.